Good evening. I am Xavier Salomon. I'm the Peter Jay Sharp Chief Curator at the Frick Collection. And of course, this evening I am not at the museum, but I am in my own apartment. Like most people at this time of crisis, we're all in our own homes. What I do for work is I travel a lot, doing research, visiting exhibitions and museums across the world, and giving lectures. And right now, of course, like everyone else, I cannot travel. So this new online series of episodes called Travels with a Curator is very much about traveling virtually around the globe, looking at lesser known museums and churches and trying to connect them to the Frick in some way. So looking at places that share a history with the Frick or places that are directly linked to objects that are held at the Frick collection. This evening, I would like to start in Venice. And Venice is one of my favorite cities in the world. I work on Venetian art. I travel to Venice several times every year. But of course, Venice is very much in my thoughts these days because, as most of northern Italy, the areas of Lombardy and the Veneto are particularly hit by this virus at the moment. And so my thoughts go out to all those people living in this area, and especially friends and colleagues in the museum world in Venice in particular. People visiting Venice tend to visit the great sites of the city, the Basilica of St. Mark's, the Doge's Palace, the Galleria dell'Accademia, the Bridge of Sighs, and of course there is always the inevitable gondola ride. But what I would like to talk about tonight is my absolute favorite museum in Venice, the dOro. The dOro is an incredible palace on the Grand Canal at the very heart of Venice. It was built in the late 1420s for the Contarini family, an aristocratic family of Venice, by the architects and sculptors Giovanni and Bartolomeo Bon. Why is it called the dOro, the Golden House? Well, originally, some of its decoration of the facade was picked out in gold, and so the name remained. The dOro is in a nevralgic, important site in Venice. It is, as you can see from this photograph taken from the roof of the palace, just across the canal from the Rialto fish market and the Rialto vegetable market. And the market was the area at Rialto around which the city developed in the Middle Ages. So it's really the heart of the city, and the dOro overlooks it from the other side of the canal. It is a building which, like all of the great Venetian buildings, has this incredible relationship between the inside and the outside. It sits on the water, literally, and this is its water entrance on the Grand Canal, where you can see that boats would arrive and people would leave from this area on boats. And this is the main entrance and exit to the palace, just on the water level of the canal. But of course, if you go upstairs in the house, what is really beautiful about this, as in many other Venetian palaces, is this relationship between outside and inside. From within the palace, you can feel the air, the water below. You can feel the rest of the city. And so this is one of the great loggias overlooking the other side of the canal, the rest of the city of Venice. And so there is this really incredible experience of being inside a palace, but feeling the outside of it in ways that really tend not to happen in buildings in other parts of the world. Now, the history of the dOro that is interesting to us is the history in the late 19th, early 20th century. The history of the building at that time goes in parallel in many ways with the history of the Frick. The house was acquired in 1894 by Baron Giorgio Franchetti. Giorgio Franchetti was born in Turin in 1865. He was about 15 years younger than Frick, but more or less a contemporary of Frick. And if we think that Frick in the 19-teens is building his house at 1 East 70th Street and filling it with great treasures, Franchetti is doing a similar thing. He buys the dOro, and after moving to Venice in 1891, and he starts filling it as a collector with great works of art. Both men wanted these houses eventually to become museums. Now, instead of building the great French-style house of the Frick, Franchetti buys an already existing residence, but a residence that had undergone a series of changes and restorations. In the early 19th century, the dOro was very badly restored. Many of the original features were either destroyed or sold. And so by the time Franchetti buys the house, he embarks on a full restoration of the building to bring it back to its original splendor. This is particularly visible on the ground floor in the Portico. The Portico in Venetian is the area that crosses, in a way, traverses the building from front to back. And this is on the ground floor, where he decorates the space with sculptures and a series of objects, but he also lays down this incredible marble carpet, mosaic, that he designs himself, and he keeps buying pieces of precious stones, porphyry, serpentine, other precious marbles, to create these designs, which he himself, it is said, was placing on the floor and working on. And he creates this great fake medieval mosaic. It's based on the floors of the Basilica of St. Mark's and the cosmatesque floors of Rome, of many of the early medieval churches, but it is entirely recreated in the 1890s and early 1900s. And it is still one of the wonderful features of this house. But Franchetti goes beyond this in terms of restoring the house. And so, for example, this is the wellhead by Bartolomeo Bon, carved in 1427 for the dOro. And this had been sold in the early 19th century. And Franchetti spends a lot of time searching for this, trying to buy it back and bring it back to the house. He finally succeeds in buying it on the open market in Paris and brings it back to Venice. So he's restoring the house, he's bringing original features back to the house. And this is very moving and beautiful. This is an incredible work of sculpture, one of the most wonderful wellheads of Venice, carved in pink Verona marble, and it shows various virtues around it. And here, in this particular case, you see the virtue of fortitude, a virtue that we all need and need to refer to in these difficult times. But the collection is a varied collection, which goes from early medieval works to more recent works of art, and it spans in media and chronology, just like the Frick collection does. Here are some of my favorite works at the dOro. These are 4 small panels by an artist from the late 15th century called Carlo Braccesco, who actually worked in Liguria, around Genoa, for most of his career. And I find these absolutely exquisite and beautiful. And of course, they relate directly to the gold grounds that Helen Clay Frick was buying eventually for the Frick collection. But like the Frick, the collection at the dOro, the collection of Franchetti, spans chronologically and geographically vast areas. And so this is the great Van Dyck at the dOro, the portrait of Marcello Durazzo, a Genoese aristocrat from around 1624. This was recently beautifully restored. And again, it relates, if you think about it, to the Van Dycks that Frick is buying in those same years. Frick is buying works by Van Dyck for the Frick collection in the 1890s and early 1900s. And 2 of our own works, actually 3, are also from the Genoese period. Like the Frick, Franchetti collects paintings and sculpture. This is one of my favorite sculptures. There are many bronze objects at the dOro by great Venetian and Italian sculptors, like the great bronzes at the Frick. But this is a work in marble. It's the bust by Alessandro Vittoria of a parish priest, Benedetto Manzini, who was the parish priest of the Church of San Gimignano, a church that doesn't exist anymore, that was destroyed during the Napoleonic period. But this is the very powerful bust of this parish priest that ended up also at the dOro. The great masterpiece of the dOro, in the same way that I would argue the Bellini St. Francis is the great masterpiece at the Frick, is the Mantegna St. Sebastian. This was actually painted at the very end of Mantegna's life in 1506, and it's this incredible life-size also, full-length image of St. Sebastian, covered in arrows. It's a very haunting and moving image. But for it, as an important work, Franchetti creates an entire chapel. So this chapel that you see with precious marbles, with a frame, with a wooden ceiling, it's an entire invention by Franchetti to set this painting in this wonderful space that he creates around it. And this is one of the most beautiful spaces in the whole of the dOro. Both Franchetti and Frick conceived these houses as museums. Frick already in the 19-teens knew the house was going to become a museum after his death in 1919. And the museum eventually opened in New York in 1935 after the death of Frick's widow. Franchetti thought the same, and in 1916, he decides to leave the dOro and everything in it to the Italian state. But of course, Franchetti's death, a few years after Frick's, is shrouded in tragedy. He became very ill of an incurable disease, and in December 1922, he decided to take his own life, and he shot himself in his bedroom in his house. His ashes couldn't be buried in a Christian cemetery as a suicide, and so it was decided that they would be interred at the dOro. And so in that same portico that he lovingly decorated, a few feet away from the beautiful wellhead that he had bought back, the Bartolomeo Bon wellhead, he is buried under this column. And I think this is, to me, one of the most beautiful tombs in the world. It was partly designed by the writer Gabriele D'Annunzio, who was a great Italian writer at the time and a good friend of Franchetti. And you have to imagine the ashes are under this broken porphyry ancient column on which, very simply, the name of Franchetti is inscribed in Latin. But of course, the great monument to Franchetti is what is around this tomb. So he's buried at the heart of his own creation, the dOro and the Great Collection. As a postscript, a little link to the dOro is much closer to us in North America. In the 19th century, new balconies were put on the dOro, and Franchetti decided to remove those balconies and substitute them with different balconies. And those 19th century balconies were acquired by a great collector in Boston, by Isabella Stewart Gardner, who in the same years as Franchetti was restoring the dOro, was building her own Venetian palazzo in Boston, Fenway Court. And of course, that is now the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. So I would like to finish with this wonderful similarities and links between three great institutions, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, the Frick Collection here in New York, and the dOro in Venice. And think of Isabella Stewart Gardner, of Giorgio Franchetti, and of Henry Clay Frick as these great figures who have given so much to us today. Now, we cannot visit these museums today in this time as we're all locked at home. But of course, as soon as things will get better, I invite you all to come back to the Frick, to go to Boston and visit the Isabella Stewart Gardner, and especially when you're next in Venice, as we all hope we will be soon, go and visit the dOro and think about Giorgio Franchetti's great contribution to art and to all of us. Thank you, and see you next time to travel somewhere else in the world. Thank you, and good night.